Welcome.
You have now just been woken up from sleeper state.
This means you've been asleep for over half a century.
This is what you've been like for the past 60 years, and the year is now 2011.
Okay, so we have a black president.
His name is Obama, and he plays basketball.
We're at war with Iraq.
Because our previous white president was an idiot.
Anywho, you're probably wondering, hey, what happened to all those communists in the Cold War?
Well, they aren't really a problem anymore, at least to America.
Before we get started, here are some essential terms you'll need to know.
The Truman Doctrine was a policy set forth by U.S. President Harry S. Truman. It supports countries and people who are against communism. The goal with this was to keep away all dictators and ultimately get rid of communism.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was an organization in which the U.S. affiliated with other countries who gave the U.S. money to produce weapons that they then gave to those other countries so they could defend themselves against the Soviet Union.
Communists, as most of you probably already know, is a political system in which everyone shares the wealth of a political economy. Everyone gets equal pay and rights, except for the higher powers. The theory of communism is that everyone holds all property in common, and actually ownership is to a community as a whole or to the state. Many people say communism leads to dictatorships.
Containment was the U.S. policy to stop the spread of communism. This was Truman's main strategy in the Cold War.
The hypothetical Iron Curtain was just the Soviets taking over Europe and blocking out everything like a curtain made of iron.
McCarthyism, or domestic blacklisting, was the practice of making accusations of disloyalty without any proof or evidence.
Mutually assured destruction, or MAD, was a doctrine of military strategy and a national security policy in which a full-scale use of weapons by two opposing sides would effectively result in the destruction of both the attacker and the defender.
So, now that you know the lingo, here are some people who have contributed heavily in the Cold War.
Joseph Stalin was the first secretary of the Communist Party for the Soviet Union Central Committee. They created a new economic policy with a highly centralized command of the economy in a 5-year plan.
Nikita Khrushchev led the Soviet Union during part of the Cold War and delivered the secret speech denouncing Stalin's purges and ushering in a less repressive era in the USSR.
Winston Churchill was a British politician known for his leadership during World War II. He served as Prime Minister twice. During 1930, Churchill took the lead in warning the world of the danger of Hitler and campaigning in Germany.
Harry S. Truman was the President of the United States near the end of World War II, just before the atomic bombs were dropped. Truman replaced FDR, who died at the beginning of his 4th term as U.S. President, which is now limited to 2 terms per president. Truman warned Japan if they didn't surrender, bad things would happen. When they didn't, Truman dropped the atomic bombs.
Joseph McCarthy was an American Republican senator. He accused many people of being communists without proof.
J. Edgar Hoover was the first director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. He stopped bank robbers.
Mao Zedong was a Chinese revolutionary guerrilla warfare strategist, poet, political theorist, leader of the Chinese Revolution, and a very busy person. He held authoritarian control over the nation until his death in 1976. Zedong is credited with commanding the Long March and leading the Communist Party of China.
All 7 of those people played a huge part in the Cold War.
So I guess we can get started now.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.
I think they get it.
Fine, fine. So here's what happened.
The first event was the Marshall Plan in 1947. This was George C. Marshall's plan to support the economy in Europe. The U.S. gave $13 billion to various European countries.
Next was the Second Red Scare in 1947. The Red Scare was a distinct period where anti-communism was extremely strong. This made everyone fear the communist part of the U.S., since the Soviet Union had made a nuclear weapon.
In 1948, the Soviet Union blockaded Berlin, so the U.S. airlifted in fuel, food, and other supplies. This was called the Berlin Airlift.
The Communist Revolution in China was in 1949. The U.S. was not in favor of China's Communist Party, so the U.S. intervened by sending in over 50,000 troops.
In 1952, North Korea and South Korea fought over the economic policies. North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union, was in favor of communism, while South Korea, supported by the U.S., was anti-communist.
The Vietnam War started on November 1st, 1955. North Vietnam supported communism and, yep, you guessed it, South Vietnam was anti-communism. Both sides wanted the country to be equal. This started right after the Indochina War.
In 1957, the Soviet Union raced against the U.S. to put the first satellite or aircraft into space. Unfortunately for the U.S., the Soviet Union won the space race with their satellite Sputnik.
In 1959, the Soviet Union moved mid-range nuclear missiles to Cuba. The U.S. was afraid of the nuclear missiles hitting America.
On May 1st, 1960, during Dwight D. Eisenhower's presidency, the U.S. U-2 spy plane was shot down over Soviet Union airspace. At first, the U.S. denied the plane's mission, but they were eventually forced to reveal its purpose as a surveillance aircraft.
The Berlin Wall was built in 1961. The wall distinguished between democracy and communism in West Berlin and East Germany.
The Bay of Pigs was an area in Cuba that the U.S. entered in 1961. Almost all the U.S. troops were killed in a huge massacre, and the U.S. feared Cuba would further attack because of Cuba's alliance with Russia.
Finally, on December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. This was the result of systematic disintegration in the economy.
That was the final specific event in the Cold War, but all throughout the war, the U.S. and Soviet Union were competing to make better, more dangerous weapons than ever.
The U.S. may have won the Cold War, but there is still communism in the world.
North Korea, the People's Republic of China, Cuba, Laos, and Vietnam are still all currently pro-communism.
But just because they exist doesn't mean you have to go bomb all the communists. As long as no one starts a war, we can all coexist in peace.
You know, that's a lot of events and people and just general information.
Yeah? What's your point?
My point is that we should all just blame it on you-know-who instead of having all this information.
You-know-who, as in Lord Voldemort? Oh, get over it. Fear of the name only increases fear of the thing itself. Besides, why would we want to blame the Cold War on Voldemort?
We could blame the Cold War on you-know-who because looking at the timeline, it makes sense, I think.
Well, you think wrong. Sorry, but in the 7th book, Lily and James Potter's tombstones say they died in 1981 when Harry was 1. Harry went to Hogwarts for the first time in 1991. 50 years later, earlier, in 1941, was when Voldemort would have been at school. So they start about the same time. But Harry doesn't defeat Voldemort until 1998, which is 7 years after the Cold War ended.
Oh. Eek.
Wait, where are you going? Sorry, I have to go. Hope this has helped you understand what happened since you went into your sleeper state. If you're curious as to who Voldemort is, read the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Bye!